Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about money, in particular, currency in fantasy role-playing games. I even wrote notes today, believe it or not. Now, in your standard fantasy role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons, the most common piece of currency is the ubiquitous gold piece. Now, having a metal-based currency in a pseudo-medieval setting makes sense, alright? It was how they actually did it, so it makes sense that you want to emulate that to some extent in a fantasy setting. But I've always found it odd that the gold piece is the most common coin in the game. Now in D&D, the coin breakdown works out as one platinum piece is equal to 10 gold pieces. Each gold piece is worth 10 silver pieces. Each silver piece is worth 10 copper pieces. There are 50 coins to the pound, which means they come out roughly a third of an ounce, which is about 10 grams. That's a decent sized coin. But this gives you some weird things. First of all, gold is really common. If you want to buy a large magic item, as in price, not size, you could easily spend 200,000 gold pieces. Yeah, go look it up. It's not that difficult to do. There are ones that cost way more than that. 200,000 gold pieces translates into 4,000 pounds of gold. 2 tons! That's absurdly silly. A cubic foot of gold, a block, 1 cubic foot in size, is 1,204 pounds. So that's 3.3 cubic feet of gold. Now, when I run D&D or Pathfinder, I always use a silver system. I don't use platinum pieces at all. Those are just used for jewelry, crowns, stuff like that. Maybe seen as ingots for really big exchanges of currency, like from one king to another king. But gold is the top coin. The next down is silver. Next is bronze, and then is copper, and the same ratios, 10, 10, 10. And it's still silly. I mean, it would mean that 200,000 gold piece magic item now becomes a 200,000 silver piece magic item, and now you end up with, 2 tons of silver, but you still end up with huge amounts of silver. But it's close enough for my taste that I can kind of ignore it as best I can. Now, I've considered going to a penny system, where you'd have 1 gold piece worth 100 silver pennies, and each silver penny would be then worth 100 copper pennies. But that would mean I would have to translate all the Pathfinder costs, and I'm lazy and really bad at math, and quite honestly, haven't figured out on my own how to do that. Anybody out there can work out a formula for me, I'd really appreciate it. But that's the system I've used, the silver system I mentioned earlier, the 10, 10, 10, gold, silver, bronze, and copper. I've used that for, I guess, close to 30 years. And it's worked well for me. It's easy because I can just take the prices in the book and I just bump it, by 1 metal space. I don't have to do any recalculations. It all pretty much stays like it is. Now, the elven currency I've used in the past has been electrum rings, and each was worth 5 secondary placed coins, which would be silver in my system or gold in the standard D&D. And I like that because I figured the elves, that's a little out of the ordinary. The kind of the fusion of 2 different metals kind of plays into their own philosophy of life. The rings, because they're easier to carry in some ways, they're easier to store in some ways. They carry them on rings around, chains around their necks or their wrists. And humans in the past, I've had them use them as wedding bands, kind of get that kind of elven magic into their marital vows. I kind of like that vibe. I have considered using a base 20 counting system for the elven cultures. So you would have their calendar, their counting system, and their money all based off of base 20, which I've loosely stolen from how the Mayans did it. But again, that takes more math, and I'm lazy, so I may just default to my standard use of electrum rings and the silver-based system I mentioned. And for the dwarves will take any kind of money you can get, you offer them. They are not too concerned with the currency and the type of metal so long as it spends. For large transactions between dwarven clans, in the past I have used ingots of mithril, and yes, I say mithril, not mithril. And those were worth 5 secondary units, so there would be 5 silvers or 5 golds. No, sorry, top tier, 5 gold or 5 platinum. And that was just for big things, you know, like deals and treaties and things like that, or if somebody needed to buy a large quantity of mithril from somebody else. But for the most part, they would just use whatever coin was available, quite often just using it by weight. They didn't care where it was from. In an old Gamma World campaign I ran, I set the campaign on an alien planet, so it had nothing to do with our world whatsoever. But it was a post-apocalyptic setting in the sense that the intergalactic or interstellar star system that were all connected by jump gates had been severed by an alien attack. So the world suddenly found itself completely isolated, and the aliens had dropped all kinds of rocks onto it, destroying lots of the people below it, without radiation necessarily, but there were still all kinds of chemical and biological weapons had been released, some of them on the planet that were part of the military and some used by the aliens. So it was still a classic Gamma World post-apocalyptic setting. It was a planet that was very metal poor. The only precious metal on the planet available was copper. So the coins broke down into as copper, brass, and ceramic. And the ceramic coins had a special dye in them, and they were baked in a particular manner and had an impression put into them. So they were not impossible to counterfeit, but they were the lowest denomination coin, and they really weren't worth people's effort to counterfeit. Basically, it would cost you more to make them than they were worth, because the government could make them on large scales, or governments make them on larger scales, and they had access to the dyes that would make them unique. But I'd like to hear what you folks in your fantasy or science fiction games have used for currency. Oh yeah, in the Game World campaign, I still use the classic Domars, but they were discovered currency. They were not currently minted currency. But what do you use in your games? Do you have something unusual? Do you like to use the bog standard out-of-the-book kind of prices and not worry about it? Do you have much more flavorful things like the British system used to be with all kinds of different variants of values and things? Do you worry that one kingdom's currency isn't going to spend the same as another kingdom? That kind of thing? Or do you just want to have as smooth transition from place to place as possible when your adventures are moving around? Sorry. Cat in the background. It looks like she's not happy at the moment. She's got a puffy tail. I think the kitten is about to attack her. So, inquiring minds want to know, what are you doing with currency in your games?